Reluctant Messenger Unleashed Nation. Welcome to episode 13, chapter 4, part 2. I'm your host, Donna Rebido, and with me is author Candy Sanderson.
Welcome back, everyone. I'm so glad you could join us for yet another adventure into the unknown.
Okay, people, get out your books. We are starting part 2 of chapter 4, Changing Perspectives. Open your books and let's start on the middle of page 55. So this section, Candy, this is a really interesting section, and it's called the Ladder of Enlightenment. And can you give us some background on that? This seemed to be very unique.
Right. First of all, when you said open your book, I just opened it and it was on page 55. So it's like, woohoo! This is the way things work with us, Donna, isn't it? You know, just back and forth, and things kind of unfold the way they're meant to. But this vision of the Ladder of Enlightenment, I learned so much from it. But first, let me tell you, I almost didn't include this in the book because it seemed just too far out there. But then on the other hand, it didn't feel right not to include it. And the muses within, they kept saying, put it in. So I did. You know, I figured if people didn't relate to it, if it turned them away, then so what? You know, I just needed to be authentic. I just needed to share my experiences fully. Now, this turned out to be really a big lesson for me, Donna, because I learned to trust the messengers. And I'll get into a little bit more of that a little bit later. But this vision was one of the first steps that I took into what I call cosmic consciousness, becoming one with the universe, with all that is. Now, this first vision occurred May 7th, 2014. That was less than 9 months after my spontaneous opening. And since then, this vision has actually grown and expanded because I've grown. But at this point, I was just like dipping my toes into this new and wide expanse of the non-physical. And it began with the vision of me observing myself as a primitive little stick figure scrambling up a ladder of circles. I was still learning about expanding my awareness and my consciousness. I was learning about energy. But I still had the tendency back then to think of myself as my body. So my perception back then only allowed like just a tiny bit of myself to exist outside of my awareness. And thus, during the vision, I saw myself as a stick figure. I was cautious then, but now I use the ladder as a tool, and I can use it to just rapidly expand my awareness. So I'll just jump right in with no hesitation. I no longer just see myself on the ladder. I am in that expanded field. I am on the ladder. I am the expanded field. This vision was also an exercise. I didn't realize it at the time, but an exercise in bilocation in 5D. I've learned that when we expand our POE, our point of existence, our awareness, we can be in two places at once. And it's all a matter, Donna, of phasing your awareness. I started off with me, and most of my POE is in the center of my body. But as I learned to expand my awareness, I became this field of energy. So I learned to stretch my energy, stretch my awareness beyond the perimeter of my physical body. And when you do that, when you expand into a field, you're beyond 3D because we've now added time and space to the formula. And as you expand, you can pull part of that awareness elsewhere.
Candy, that's crazy. Is that what you were doing? Is that what you were doing?
Yes. Think about it, Donna. It's natural. We do it all the time when we daydream, when we use our imagination, and when we explore our dreams at night. But this vision took bilocating to a new level. But yeah, that's what I was doing. I didn't realize it at the time. in fact, as I saw this first vision, I pretty much looked like that picture, a stick figure climbing up a flat, two-dimensional ladder made out of circles. Part of me had expanded into a field of energy,
Okay.
but I pinched off just enough of me to have this vision. So there were two of me, but most of me was in this observer field. But things have changed. Now, when I use the ladder, there's this shift. It's a phasing, and more of me is on the ladder with just enough of my 3D observer remaining so that I can document the experience.
So Candy, we need to stop here and talk a little bit about bilocation, because to me, bilocation was, I'm in 3D and I'm showing up at two physical places. So I'm here in Phoenix and I show up in Florida. But what you're saying, this opens up a whole new world. As many times as I've read your book, I didn't get it. I didn't get that you were bilocating. So for me, this is a really big lesson here. It's really huge. And this happened to me. I would like to share an experience at Monroe. I was at the near-death experience workshop with Dr. Scott Taylor and Charlene Nicely. And we were going back and forth in the interview. And you can hear it on my podcast. You can actually hear us doing this. And Charlene had asked me about my near-death experience. So I'm answering her, but I'm remembering or bilocating to that NDE experience. And I'm saying something to her and I go, oh, I think I'm, she mentioned bilocating. I said, I think I'm bilocating now. And she goes, you are, and I'm bilocating with you. And it just was really, and I hadn't thought about that till this episode. That was crazy.
Donna, that is so cool. I didn't see this as bilocation either until I was preparing for our interview. But when you add time and space to our 3D world, we end up adding aspects of consciousness because we are going beyond our physical bodies. This is when 5D bilocation becomes a reality. Again, it's all a matter of phasing, moving aspects of one part of your consciousness to another part. And that other part has nothing to do with time or space. It can be anywhere.
That's crazy. And so let's go to the top of page 56. And is that what you saw? So this is what you're talking about? You're talking about that Ladder of Enlightenment?
Yes. And this is really a fairly good representation of what I saw during that first vision. A simple line drawing of me, like a stick figure climbing up a ladder. Only the rungs of the ladder were circles. And I immediately knew that the circles represented my POE, my point of existence, my full awareness. Let me shift gears a little bit. And I want to describe my later experiences with the ladder. With more time, more of my awareness had shifted. And I was no longer just pinching off and observing myself on the ladder. More of it was actually on the ladder. I became a participant. And as I became a participant, that's when the ladder truly became a tool to use.
Wait a minute. So you're talking about this as a ladder. This is critical. It's huge. It's big. It's amazing. We can use this as a tool. And again, I had no idea until we're talking about it in this episode. I can use it as a tool.
I agree. And this is the beauty of working with the messengers. They are always giving me these wonderful tools to use. But true confession time, let me be honest. I didn't realize the ladder was a tool, even though the messengers are always giving me tools. But I didn't recognize that at the time of the vision. It was only years later when I revisited the ladder that I realized I was no longer just observing myself as this little stick figure, climbing up the ladder, but I was on the ladder. I was fully participating with all my senses on high alert. I mean, I looked around and all I could see were these heavy clouds of mist that were swirling about my feet. I mean, I couldn't even see the ground below me. And I look up, and this ladder that I'm on, this odd ladder made out of huge metal circles, was reaching straight up into the sky, and I could only see clouds above.
Okay, I love interrupting you. So this ladder of enlightenment is it becomes a game changer. It's another way for people. It's another tool for people. So when it almost is something that we could use for my podcast listeners, the newbies. It's a real game changer, Candy. Just want you to know that.
The reason you didn't read about these details in the book is because when I had this vision, they weren't there. During that first initial vision, I only observed that stick figure. But let me do some unleashing here. In the summer of 2020, I was invited to be a guest speaker at IANS, International Association of Near-Death Studies. And I decided to include the Ladder of Enlightenment in the talk. As soon as I started rereading this chapter, it's like, boom, I found myself back on the Ladder of Enlightenment. And I had this incredible detail that wasn't there the first time I saw myself. And it was then, only then, that I understood that the ladder could be a tool. And I felt so grateful with this new knowledge. Now I can and do use the ladder as a tool. It has developed into this, I don't know, this instrument that allows me to bilocate in 5D, and I'm actually there. But the reason it took so long, it had taken me time to learn how to really expand my POE and stretch it beyond my physical body, stretch it into a field beyond that 3D. And it was something I wasn't proficient at doing. I had very little practice when I had that first vision in May of 2014, and realized that was just 9 months after my initial opening to the world of energy.
That's just crazy. But what I like about it, you're not just explaining a diagram in the book. So readers of the book, they come across this enlightenment and they're going to be like me. They just think it's a diagram. But now you're making that diagram come alive, Candy. I always thought of it as abstract, but to have it as alive in a tool is really, really important. It makes it come alive.
Yeah, it does, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Now when I actually step on the ladder, Donna, I feel myself standing there. And these rungs, first of all, I know they're made out of metal. They're these huge, huge metal rings. And they're so large that I have to actually stand on my toes and stretch as far as I can just to reach that rung above me. But when I do this, I'm really there. That surrounding mist, it makes this metal ladder cold, slippery, and wet. And so I have to totally focus on each step so that I don't fall. This is important because it forces me to be in the now. I have to be in the present moment. I guess it's like mountain climbing. I've never climbed a mountain, but you certainly, I would think, would not want to get distracted by your to-do list.
No.
So, right. So I'm on this ladder, I'm climbing for what I think is a long time. But time is different here. Have I been on this ladder for hours, for weeks, for months? Maybe I've been on it for years. I really don't know. Time doesn't work the same way.
I know what you mean, Candy. When I had my near-death experience, it was as if time dissolved. So when I went through the saran wrap, my first thought was, oh, now I'm dead. But my second thought was I immediately felt that time difference between time being in this dimension and eternity being in that dimension. And it even stayed with me because the contrast got greater when I came back. And I almost feel like that there's something going on with my skin, like something changed my skin receptors. So now I can actually feel time moving in this dimension. It's almost like clocks on the planet are in my skin. You know, I can hear the tick tock, tick tock. But what I like about you in this book is that I can change my POE and I can change that. So yeah, something happened to my skin. I could feel my skin, even though I didn't have skin. I felt something
But
different there.
you know, you changed when you were in the non-physical.
Yes.
You brought back a skill or condition that you didn't have before. You could feel time on your skin because you felt it when you were your authentic you, when you were nothing but energy, when you were reacting to your NDE.
Yes.
Now, this is kind of like where I am on the ladder of enlightenment. You know, before, during the first vision, I was just this stick figure. I mean, I wasn't even that. I was here just observing that stick figure. But now, with every trip back on the ladder, more and more of my awareness moves away from my physical body and into that field where the ladder is. Now, when I'm on the ladder, I don't have a physical body. I'm beyond, like you were, beyond time and space. Yet I still felt the cool, wet rungs of the ladder on my hands that weren't really there. I felt my body that wasn't really there as I stretched to reach each rung that wasn't there. You know, I saw the mist at my feet. The mist wasn't really there. My feet weren't really there. And the clouds that weren't there because I'm not in 3D. But Donna, I am more than 3D. And that's what makes all the difference. All of a sudden, these things are there and they feel more real than they do in 3D.
Yeah, and Candy, that reminds me of what Bob Monroe said. I always go back to that in one of his books. He's saying, when you first go out of body, it's like a jello mold. So you have the mold and you put the jello in and it gets solid. And then you take the mold off. So the jello now looks like the mold. And he said that's how we are when we go out of body. When we first go out, we're like that mold, like we're molded as Candy or Donna. And so we talk in terms of having a body, or it's like we're seeing with our, I think William Buhlman says we're seeing with our astral eyes or hearing with our astral ears. Yeah. And what's interesting too is that I knew that there was a line of death that I was getting close to. And when I started getting closer to that, I started becoming part of the all. I have that experience of going from Donna the body, Donna the jello mold, my energy shape, and into feeling like, oh, I'm really going to collapse into the cosmic consciousness. But I knew it was me, but I knew it was a time distortion.
Wow, what a great experience, Donna. I mean, as you got closer to that line of not coming back, you morphed from this jello mold to like your energy self. And then you began just like blending into everything. Personally, I've got to say, I'm glad you stopped there and came back because otherwise we wouldn't be here. And, you know, I don't think I've really taken the time to say this publicly, but, you know, since we've become friends, I mean, when I was first on your Exploring Consciousness podcast, we've become fast friends and you are so important to me. So thank you so much for coming back. You know, it just
thank you, Candy. You might have been there helping God make that decision. So
I may have been there with my lasso pulling you back in. But back to the ladder. While I'm climbing this ladder, not the first time, but the second time, I really start witnessing a pattern. I actually saw the pattern the first time, but I was witnessing it this time. And what was happening is these giant rings that I was grabbing, they were overlapping, but very, very gradually. I mean, I first thought, is this my imagination? Then I realized, no, it isn't. And then another thing I noticed is the part that I would grab and then pull myself up on, then keep climbing, it looked like a smile. That part of the ring is like, oh my goodness, that's a smile. And with each circle that I climbed, even though it was gradual, that smile got even larger. It was great.
You know, Candy, you know, you're climbing the rings, but did you know where you were going? Did you have any idea? And do you understand the purpose of this vision while you were in it? Like, why were they having you do this?
No, no. And I didn't care. I mean, you know, I I could only see this part of the ladder. It was going into clouds. There was nothing that I could see below. I didn't know how long I'd been climbing. I didn't know where I was climbing. I just knew that I had to climb. There was this compulsion. I just had to do it. So I did. And all the while now that observer me, little part over here, is watching without judging, just observing. I didn't know where I'd come from, where I was going. I just knew I had to climb. So I did.
You know, that's interesting because I think on page 56, so on page 56, there's something interesting there that kind of triggered that. I'm going to read a little bit here. It says, not unlike stepping stones, this upward energy continues, allowing for more and more bliss to occur. And I love that idea about the bliss. And can you tell us a little bit about, you know, this smiling?
Sure.
So you go from POE to smiling to bliss. Let's talk about that.
Well, you know, it's true. As I continued to climb this ladder, I started feeling more and more bliss. I mean, not only is the smile getting larger, but that energy is just enveloping me. And I am just feeling this connection with the higher vibrational energies. It felt wonderful. And more of these beautiful frequencies were entering my POE, my field of awareness. And it just felt magical. It was wonderful.
You know, that brings up, if we go further down on page 56, this message then talks about smiling again. And I just wanted to say, in psychology, again, I'm teaching, you know, you're coming up with concepts that I teach in psychology. So when we got on the chapter on emotion, there's different theories of emotion. There's the James Lang theory of emotion, the Cannon-Bard theory of emotion, and they're trying to describe which comes first, the experience, the physical reaction, and then the emotion. Or, you know, there's a lot of controversy about this, you know, what comes first. But here's the thing about smiling is it changes your chemistry. And what happens, it's like tears, the difference between the tears when you're sad and the tears of joy. There's different chemistry there. And what they found is there's more endorphins that are released. So it doesn't really matter which theory you propose, just do something to make yourself smile, and that'll trigger those endorphins, and you can come out of that in a heartbeat. So I really like that. This energy pattern continues upward toward the circle, let me read it. The energy pattern continues upward toward the energy of enlightenment until the smile becomes a full circle, becoming the next globe of awareness. What I like about this, it not only changes you chemically, but in the ladder of enlightenment that you've given us, it's a vehicle for movement. It's much more dynamic. So I love these thoughts. I love where it's taking us, but especially that you can use it as a tool. What can you tell us more about that?
Sure, Donna. You know, while I'm climbing, I feel so blissful. You know, I don't have a care in the world. And with each circle that I climbed, that bliss intensified. But it really started getting powerful when I reached the top of the ladder. So when the last two circles completely aligned with each other, they became one circle. It's like, okay, I'm done. I have finished the climb. And I too became one. I felt this sense of of unity. In retrospect, I understood. The messengers had said those rings of the ladder represented my POE. So my full awareness had combined with the surrounding fields of bliss to complete me. But what I experienced was unbelievable. It was a sense of oneness, of unity, of wholeness. And so here I am standing on this ladder of enlightenment. And I am perfectly balanced, feeling bliss, feeling whole. And without any hesitation whatsoever, not even a thought. I just simply let go. Talk about trust. And I drifted from this ladder of enlightenment into a cosmic void, just like an astronaut in deep space, Donna, in ultra slow motion. It's like my body just rotated so slowly, head over heels, floating in this ocean of peace, of tranquility, of serenity, this ocean of divine love. I felt transformed. You know, I looked around and my body began to disappear, and I could no longer tell where my body ended and that deep blue ocean of the cosmos, like you have in your background, began. I disintegrated into a cosmic void. And as I continued melting, and it reminds me of what you said in your NDE, you went from jello to an energy body, and then you started dissolving. I was both nothing and everything. And I dissolved until I became light. So while I'm floating in this divine void as light, I hear the echo of the word Om. And it was like a warm blanket on a cold winter's day. It just wrapped me and comforted me beyond words. And although I didn't realize it, I didn't know what this was. I found out later, actually, it was through reading Maverick Bardiger's book, that this was a state of cosmic consciousness. Sorry, I get teary-eyed.
So that was your first experience.
Yes.
You know, Candy, when you talk about this, I feel like I'm bilocating like I did at Monroe, where I'm listening to you and I'm actually reliving, or I'm actually bilocating in the 5D now that I understand this. And this is a secret that NDEers and OBEers, mystics know about. And when I say know, I mean know as the definition of know is to experience, to have an experience with. Oh, I know them means that, oh, I know Candy. That means I already know her. I've had an experience with it. So the root word of knowledge is to know, and it comes from cogitate, to cognate, to know, to have an experience. It's where the word recognize comes from. I re-know someone. So whenever you talk about this, it's really profound to me. It just really is. And I'm going to go now to the bottom of page 57. Let me talk about this because it's really good. And then like we're on the middle, and it says, with a profound silence, I drifted into the abyss and sank deep into this unknown, yet something from a familiar place. with this muted void, this space that contained nothing and everything, a sound came forth and enveloped me. It was the deep echo of the word Om. And I don't know if you know how powerful Om is to me. So I chant with Om. There, you can go on YouTube, and there's the Tibetan monks will chant Om. It's very sacred to me, and it really touches me as I read this. And Om is the central frequency and tone in life. It's Om. It's what we vibrate at. It's what the earth vibrates. I just have to read the word Om, or someone say something to Om, and I feel like I'm starting to bilocate. So I really have to ground myself, especially when I'm in acupuncture practice. But if I have someone on the table that I really feel like needs a reset, like they're way out of bounds, I have an Om tuning fork, and I'll play that tuning fork, and I can feel my patient's body starting to reset. So Om to me it's a very sacred word, and I'm wondering what does it mean to you when you heard that? What happened there? That was crazy.
Well, when this happened, when I had the vision, I had heard of Om before, but it actually meant nothing to me. And I didn't, I knew people chanted it sometimes when they did yoga. I didn't do yoga. So I knew how it was used, but I had no true knowledge of it. And I didn't even research Om until I was writing the book years later. And that's when I started to realize how significant it was. On page 58, I talk about an article I read by Rachel Zelaya. And she said that Om is a vibration that was present when the universe was made, and that everything comes from vibration. She said, Om is the most elemental of vibrations. By the time I decided to investigate Om, I've had a lot of time with the messengers, and I was viewing the world through the lens of energy. So it was making a lot of sense to me to think of this one syllable word as a vibration. But as I read her next sentence on page 58, Zelaya says, it is the sound of the void. And that blew my mind. I couldn't believe it. It totally validated the experience that I had. Reading this made me understand. No, it made me begin to understand the importance that Om was in the vision.
And you said the word validation. So I like that you follow up with your own validation on page 59. And it's talking about Dr. Partee. And so we're over on page 59, on that whole page. So what was happening there?
Donna, I want to tell you a story. I met Gail, who became a friend of mine, when we were both at Monroe Institute. We were taking Bill Buellman's out-of-body intensive class. She was my roommate. We became close friends, and she sent me this book written by an anesthesiologist, Dr. Raj Partee. He had a very profound and extensive near-death experience, and he wrote about this in a book that she sent me called Dying to Wake Up. Now, when Gail sent me this book, I had already written this book. It was in the final stages of editing, but it was so significant, this story about Dr. Partee, that I actually went back into this chapter and added this section. When I first got the validation about Om from research with Rachel Zelaya's article, I thought, gosh, this vision really was important. So I'm glad I decided to listen to the advice of the muses to include this section in the book. But the validations, the unsolicited validations from Dr. Partee, took this to a new level. Let me explain. During Dr. Partee's NDE, archangels escorted him. Where? Wait for it. To the top of a ladder of enlightenment. I'm thinking, you can't make this stuff up.
You cannot make this up.
So one of these archangels that escorted him said that the top of the ladder, quote, is like everything and nothing. Here's another validation. When I reached the top of the ladder, I entered a void that contained, and I quote, nothing and everything. Dr. Party at the top of the ladder saw a being of light. At the top of the ladder, Donna, I became the light. I was a being of light. So I am reading this book and I'm just amazed at the similarities. As Dr. Party approached this being of light, he heard the distant chant of, wait for it again, Om, just like I had, Om. And as the light faded, Dr. Party experienced what he called was a cosmic void, as I had, and he also described floating weightless like an astronaut in space, matching my own experience. Well, first of all, finding someone else who experienced a ladder of enlightenment was significant, but all those other things that I could tick off, it just amazed me. So I had to reach out to him. I did. And I told him about my ladder of enlightenment experiences and the similarities. And this started a beautiful conversation back and forth. So much so that he too wrote an endorsement, not only for this book, but for my second book, The Reluctant Messenger Returns. But after reading his experiences that were so similar to mine, I finally, truly understood why the muses had nudged me to keep this in the book. It was unbelievable how similar this was. And another reason for having it in the book, although there were uncanny similarities between our experiences, there is one huge difference, Donna. Dr. Parti had all of this during a near-death experience. While me, Donna, I was sitting at my dining room table having a cup of coffee, a decaf coffee at that. Unbelievable, isn't it? It's crazy.
It is, but I never realized that you were not having these in the book. And when you think about what we learned today, it's a really important message, this whole section, this whole episode, if you will. Now think about what we've learned today. We've talked about bilocation, the Ladder of Enlightenment as a tool, and now the power of Om. And these are life-changing messages. People can hear this and just take one of them, but take all three of them. It's really important and powerful. And I want to thank you publicly for listening to the Muses and Guides and for sharing these messages and visions. You could have been too scared. You could have thought, what are people going to think about me? But you did that. And I just wanted to thank you.
Thanks. Well, thank you, Donna. Changing perspectives is the title of this chapter. And we've learned about changing our POE, our point of existence, where we can change our perspective and we can see things differently. I have my book in hand, and on the back of my book, there is an endorsement by Roberta Moore, who's a dear friend of mine. And her last endorsement says, "This is a book that needs to be savored, not just read." And it says, Roberta Moore, producer of spiritual films. She wasn't at the time, but she now is vice president of IANS. And I'm thinking, small world. But by her saying this is a book that needs to be studied, it needs to be read time and time again, look at us. I didn't realize until I was preparing for this episode, I didn't realize that I was actually bilocating. If I hadn't been asked to be a guest speaker on ions, I would not have gone back and revisited the Ladder of Enlightenment. But when I did, that's when I realized that it was a tool. And all of this does refer to changing our perspectives. I look at this chapter now, I look at this, what I thought was a silly little vision of me climbing up this ladder of enlightenment. And I realized how powerful it was, how powerful the experience was, how powerful Om was, how powerful it was to be able to step into the frequency of all that is. And I guess when I had the validation by a medical doctor during his NDE, it made everything seem perfect. And I would have never learned about Dr. Partee if Gail hadn't sent me his book, just in the nick of time, like right before publication. But this is the way guidance works. We go back and we revisit things. We go back and we gain a different perspective. Sometimes we're meant to find validations, but if we don't search them, the universe has a way of bringing that back to us. Remember my first message about the flower, Donna? The message that I said, oh, that's, I got to get to work and forget that. I just discounted it. Well, the messengers, the muses within, knew I hadn't gotten it. Right. So then they bring me this mystical experience with the royal poinciana tree a few minutes later. This is the same thing with the Ladder of Enlightenment. It took on more importance after I realized Dr. Partee's experience and after listening to you telling me about the importance of Om. This is when I accidentally discovered the power of the ladder as a tool. I use this tool now as a way to achieve what Bob Monroe used to call escape velocity, to get into an expanded state of consciousness rapidly. You just climb up that ladder, jump off, and you're there.
I love that. Candy, I love that we're unleashing these messages. Like you said, it's going back and rereading. A lot of people don't know the value of that, but you're going back and rereading and finding support messages, and it's really, it's coming back so that you can move forward. I love that. And think about in this episode alone, when we're talking about these 3 messages, how transformative they can become, that we're bilocating in the 5D. I hadn't considered that. The Ladder of Enlightenment as a tool, and I hadn't considered that. The power of Om, which I know Om really well. So I wanted to thank you. And it seems like for me, it's a good place to stop. So as a good teacher, your homework is, we're on 59. So you guys are to start page 60 and move forward. And that's where we're going to start next time on The Reluctant Messenger Unleashed. Okay. Share, like, comment, follow us on social media. Until next time. Mwah, mwah, mwah.
Thank you, everybody. And thank you, Donna. This was wonderful.
Thank you, Candy.
Bye.